My daughter married into a wealthy family and pretended I was dead. She told them she grew up alone. I never confronted her. One day, her husband's family needed medical background information for a serious issue. They traced her records and found out I was alive and healthy. They asked me to confirm some history. I told them gently, I was not part of her life story, so I cannot fill in any chapters. They felt betrayed. They pulled back all support until she rebuilt trust. She said I ruined everything. I said, you buried me in your story. I just stayed where you placed me. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, if you enjoy stories like this, you want to be part of the 10% of our viewers who click on the like button. This really makes us happy. If you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly support us today by subscribing to this channel. This helps us to bring you more beautiful stories. It will be great to tell us where you are watching us from in the comments section. Now let's get into the details of the story. I used to think of my daughter as my everything. She was the reason I worked 2 jobs, the reason I sacrificed everything I wanted to build a life for her. When she was young, she needed me to be there for scraped knees, bad dreams, and school plays. But as the years passed, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic at first, but it was undeniable. She started pulling away. At first, I told myself it was just a phase. She was growing up, becoming independent. I told myself that was good, that it meant she was strong. But there was something hollow in the way she stopped reaching out, in the way her voice grew more distant when she spoke about the future. By the time she was a teenager, I was already a shadow in her life. She had become absorbed in her world, friends, school, and eventually, a boyfriend who would later become her husband. I couldn't remember the last time we had a real conversation, the last time we shared anything personal. I could barely remember when the distance between us started. It was just there, like an invisible wall. I had always been there, of course, providing for her, loving her the best I could. But my presence in her life became something she tolerated, not something she cherished. When she met Jason, a wealthy young man from a prominent family, I thought it would be a fleeting thing. He seemed nice enough, and I tried my best to be welcoming when they started bringing him around. But I could tell, deep down, that something was different. The way she acted around him, the way she spoke about him, it wasn't the same as the past relationships. It wasn't just love, it was something else. A need for approval, for validation from people who could offer her a life beyond what I could give her. And though I wanted to believe she was still the same girl I raised, I knew deep down that she had already decided what version of her story she wanted to live. When they announced their engagement, I wasn't surprised. In fact, I expected it. What did surprise me, though, was how quickly she distanced herself from me. There was no invitation to the wedding. Not that I would have expected one, but there was nothing, not even a conversation about it. I wasn't included in any of the planning, not even a mention. The day of her wedding, I saw photos on Facebook, her in a beautiful white dress, her new husband beside her, beaming with pride. She looked happy, and for a moment, I felt that familiar ache in my chest, that mixture of pride and pain. I wanted to be happy for her, I really did. But as I scrolled through the images of her perfect day, I realized I wasn't in them. I wasn't part of her life anymore, not in any way that mattered. To her, I had become a footnote in a story she no longer wanted to tell. She had rewritten her history. I wasn't a part of her new life. And in that silence, I realized something profound. I had become nothing more than a stranger to her. It wasn't until months later, after she and Jason settled into their new life, that I got a call from a law firm representing Jason's family. They had a medical issue, and they needed some background information on my daughter's family history. They told me it was important for a potential hereditary issue. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But then they explained that they needed details about her medical history, and that they couldn't get it from her. There was a request to speak with me directly, something that caught me off guard. Why would they want to talk to me after all this time? I remember the exact moment I sat down to write the email they had requested, the moment I started drafting my response. It felt surreal, like something out of a dream, or maybe a nightmare. I knew exactly what they were asking, and I knew what they wanted me to say. They needed to know about her childhood, about the family she grew up in, about her health. about me. They were trying to fill in the gaps she had left behind. And in that moment, I realized I had been erased from her story. I wrote back to them, keeping it short and polite. I'm sorry, but I cannot provide that information. I was not part of her life story in any meaningful way, and I cannot fill in any chapters. I remember the weight of those words as I typed them. It was the truth, plain and simple. I had been there, yes, but my daughter had made it clear that she didn't want me in her narrative. The silence I had felt between us had become too loud to ignore. And now, with the cold formality of this legal request, the silence had become something else, a betrayal of sorts, though not by me. The family on Jason's side was confused. They didn't understand why I wasn't willing to help, and I could hear the unease in their voices when they called me back. They thanked me for my time, but I could tell they didn't believe what I had said. It felt like I had betrayed them somehow. They were not accustomed to secrets, to unanswered questions. They expected my full cooperation, but I had refused. Weeks passed, and soon enough, I started hearing the rumors. They had found out the truth. My daughter had lied. She had told them that she had no parents, no real family. She had painted a picture of herself as someone who grew up alone, without the burden of a complicated past. They had trusted her, and now they felt deceived. They pulled back from her. The financial support she had been receiving from her in-laws was withdrawn. Her relationships with them became strained. The perfect life she had built was starting to crumble, and it wasn't because of anything I had done. It was because of what she had done, what she had hidden from them. The phone call came a few days later. My daughter was furious. She had found out what had happened, and she blamed me. "You ruined everything," she shouted when I answered. "Why couldn't you just stay out of it? Why couldn't you just let me live my life?" Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I almost believed she was crying. But then the anger came back. She wasn't crying because she missed me. She was crying because she had been exposed. I hadn't just been a secret. Now, I had become a problem. And still, I didn't apologize. I couldn't. I had tried to be there for her when she needed me. I had tried to support her, to love her. But she had buried me in her story, and I had only stayed where she placed me. "I didn't bury you," I told her softly. "You buried me. I just stayed where you put me." She hung up on me that day, and I knew, deep down, that this wasn't something we could fix. Not now. Not anymore. After my conversation with my daughter, I felt a deep silence settle around me. It wasn't just the lack of her voice or the weight of her words. It was the silence of everything unsaid. The tension between us had always been there, but now it had grown too loud to ignore. For days, I couldn't escape the feeling of being invisible in my own life, watching from the margins as she built a world that didn't include me. I thought back to when she was young, to when I was her whole world. I remembered the way she used to hold my hand in public, the way she'd always look for me in a crowd. But now, I had become a ghost in her life. Not the kind you see in horror movies, but the kind you can't remember, like I never existed at all. As I sat in my small apartment, the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing by outside felt like the only constants in my life. The world seemed to move on without me. My daughter had married into a family that was everything I was not: wealthy, influential, and well-connected. It wasn't just a different lifestyle, it was a different world. And as much as I tried to stay neutral, to keep my distance, it hurt to see how easily she had slipped into that world, how quickly she had abandoned the life we had once known. She had become part of their world, and in doing so, she had erased me. Or maybe, I had never been in her world in the first place. I didn't speak to her for weeks after that phone call. The silence between us stretched like an ocean, deep and unyielding. I didn't know what to say, and honestly, I didn't think she wanted to hear from me. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. But the emptiness that lingered was something I couldn't shake. I tried to distract myself with work, with simple things, reading, cleaning, cooking meals for myself, but nothing felt real anymore. I wasn't angry at her, not really. I was just sad. I had given everything to raise her, and now she didn't need me. Or maybe it was more accurate to say she didn't want me. The first sign that something was wrong came when I received an unexpected call from the husband's family, specifically from Jason's mother. She had always been kind to me in the few interactions we'd had. but there had been a formal distance between us. She was polite, reserved, but never really warm. I had understood that. She was a woman of high society, and I was just someone from the wrong side of the tracks. But now, as I listened to her voice on the phone, I heard something new in her tone, something softer, almost apologetic. "We need your help," she said, after some pleasantries. "It's about medical history. You're the only one who can provide some of the answers we need for the baby. It's very important." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. I had no idea what she meant by that, but I could feel the weight of her words. For a moment, I thought about saying no. I thought about telling her that I couldn't help. After all, I hadn't been part of their lives for years now. But I couldn't bring myself to turn her down. Something about her tone made me feel like this was more than just a request. It was an unspoken plea for trust, or maybe an olive branch. "What exactly do you need to know?" I asked, my voice steady but unsure. "It's about her family history," Jason's mother explained. "Medical conditions, hereditary risks. We need to know what you can tell us about her upbringing, her health, anything that might be relevant. We've tried contacting her, but," she trailed off, and I could feel the unspoken words hanging in the air. They had tried to get the information from my daughter, but she had refused. Or maybe she had simply ignored them. "We thought, perhaps, you could help us." I knew exactly what she was asking for. She wanted me to provide medical history for my daughter. But in that moment, I felt something break inside of me. It was a cruel irony. After all these years of being erased from her life, I was now being asked to fill in the blanks, to be useful in a way I had never been before. I had never been part of her adult life, never been considered enough to be included in her wedding or her personal milestones, but now they needed me. And I couldn't help but feel a deep bitterness at the way I had been reduced to a source of information, a mere footnote in her life story. "I'm sorry, but I can't provide the information you're asking for," I said, my voice calm but firm. I wasn't part of her life story, and I can't fill in any chapters that I wasn't a part of. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, her hesitation. I wasn't sure what she expected me to say, but I knew it wasn't that. "I see," she said, finally, her voice low. "Well, thank you for your time." When she hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with guilt. I had said the truth, but it had been so harsh, so final. I wasn't sure if I had done the right thing. I had no desire to cause more problems for my daughter, but I couldn't lie, either. Not for her. Not for anyone. I had lived my life with honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. And though it had cost me, I couldn't compromise on that now. A few days passed in quiet contemplation. I hadn't heard from my daughter, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth would come out. Her in-laws were not the kind of people to let things slide. They would find out that I had told them the truth, that I had refused to help them rewrite her history. They would feel betrayed. They would see it as an insult to their family's reputation. And my daughter? She would be caught in the middle. And I wondered, did she care? I didn't have to wait long for an answer. Jason's family, furious with my refusal to cooperate, began to distance themselves from her. I heard the whispers, the quiet mutterings from the people who had once been so kind to her. They started pulling back their financial support, the resources they had so generously offered her in the past. It was the only way they knew how to express their anger. And my daughter, caught in the web of her own lies, had no choice but to face the consequences. The calls started coming in. First, from acquaintances. Then, from friends. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. Why had I refused to help? What was going on? But the question I couldn't answer was the one that echoed in my mind every night. Why had she done it? Why had she erased me from her life? The phone rang again, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I would hear from her. My daughter, who hadn't spoken to me in weeks, was calling. When I saw her name on the screen, my heart sank. I thought about not answering, about letting the silence between us stretch just a little longer, but something inside me told me this was a conversation that had to happen. I answered, my voice steady but my hands trembling slightly. "Mom, we need to talk," she said. Her voice, once so familiar, now sounded distant, like we were strangers on the phone. It wasn't the warmth I had expected, but I could sense a tension beneath her words, a quiet urgency. I wasn't sure whether to be angry, hurt, or just resigned to the fact that everything had changed. She hadn't called to apologize. She hadn't called to explain. No, this wasn't about reconciliation. This was about damage control. I could feel it in my bones. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice even, trying not to let the bitterness I felt seep into the conversation. I had no idea what she wanted from me now. After everything that had happened, I didn't know if there was anything left to salvage. But I knew one thing for sure. She wasn't the same person anymore. Not the girl I had raised. Not the young woman I had poured my heart into. She was someone else, and I had no idea who she was anymore. It's everything, Mom, she said, her voice catching slightly. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what went wrong. They're angry. Jason's family is angry, and now everyone is talking about us, about me. I thought I could leave all that behind. But it's all falling apart. I wanted to say something, to tell her that it was her own choices that had led her here, that this was the price of trying to rewrite her past. But I didn't. Instead, I let her talk. I had learned by now that my words would never be enough to change her mind. Whatever had happened between us, she had made up her mind. She had made the decision to move on, to shut me out, and now she was trying to piece together the wreckage of her new life. The pieces didn't fit, and she was struggling to understand why. You don't have to do this alone, I said quietly, my voice almost a whisper. I wasn't sure if I meant it, if I could really help her, but I said it anyway. She had always been my daughter, and no matter how much she had hurt me, part of me still wanted to believe that she could be saved, that there was some way back to the relationship we once had. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I felt a pang of doubt. Could I really help her? Or was I just trying to make myself feel better, trying to convince myself that everything could go back to normal? I don't know what you want from me, I continued. You've already made your choices. You've already pushed me out of your life. You don't get to come back and pretend everything's fine, that we can just pick up where we left off. There was silence on the other end of the phone. I could feel the tension building, the space between us widening. It wasn't just her fault. I had pushed her away, too, in my own way. But I had never abandoned her. I had never turned my back on her, even when she stopped reaching for me. Even when she started building a life that didn't have room for me in it, I had been there, quietly, in the background, waiting. But now, as I listened to her on the phone, it was clear that this wasn't going to be easy. Not for either of us. Mom, I'm sorry, she said finally, the words coming out in a rush. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to push you away. She paused, and for the first time in a long while, I could hear the vulnerability in her voice. I just didn't want to be that person anymore. The person with a past, with you. It was like a punch to the gut. She didn't want to be me anymore. She didn't want to be the person who had come from a broken home, who had struggled, who had fought for everything she had. She didn't want to be associated with someone like me, someone who had been too real, too honest, too imperfect. In her eyes, I had become a burden, a mark of shame. And I had never realized just how deeply she had internalized that shame until that moment. You don't get to rewrite your story like that, I said, my voice trembling now. You don't get to erase me and pretend it never happened. I was there always. And I don't know how you can stand there and pretend I didn't give everything for you. I didn't mean it like that, she said quickly, as if the words had slipped out by mistake. She hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. I wanted to be better. I wanted to be part of something bigger, something that felt like I was worth something. And I thought I could leave the past behind. I let out a long breath, trying to steady myself. You can't just leave the past behind, honey. The past is what makes you who you are. You can't erase it, no matter how hard you try. There was another pause, a long one, and I could hear the faint sound of her breathing. I knew this conversation was far from over, but as much as I wanted to hold on to the hope that somehow we could go back to the way things were, I knew deep down that it was too late. Too much had happened, too much had been said. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mom, she said quietly. I don't think I can fix what I've done, but I need you to understand. I need you to understand that I didn't want this. I didn't want to hurt you. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. For the first time, I could hear the regret in her voice. Maybe it was too late to fix anything, but at least I had that. At least I had her recognition of what she had done. I understand, I said softly, the words coming easier than I expected. But understanding doesn't change anything. It doesn't change what you've done or how much I hurt. And with that, the conversation ended. Not with any resolution, not with any promises of healing, but with a quiet acknowledgement of the distance between us. She had taken her own path, and I had no choice but to let her walk it, even if that meant we would never walk the same road again. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between us stretched even further, like a chasm neither of us was brave enough to cross. I went about my life as best I could, the rhythm of daily routines grounding me. I kept myself busy with work, with little hobbies I had picked up over the years, and I tried not to think about her too much. It was hard not to, of course. She was my daughter, and no matter how much she distanced herself, I still had a mother's heart, a heart that never stopped aching for her, even in her absence. But I didn't call her. I didn't reach out. I couldn't. She had made it clear that she didn't want me in her life anymore, at least not in the way I had been. She had chosen her new family, her new life, and I was nothing more than an inconvenient detail, one she could erase when it suited her. I had come to terms with that, or at least I thought I had. It was late one evening when the phone rang again, and this time I didn't hesitate. Her name flashed on the screen, and my heart did a strange flip in my chest. I hadn't heard from her in so long, and part of me wondered if this was the call where she would finally admit the truth. That she had made a mistake, that she missed me, that maybe she wanted to rebuild what we had lost. But as soon as I answered, I knew something was different. There was a sharpness in her voice, a tension I hadn't heard before. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her tone almost too calm, too controlled. "Can we meet?" There was a pause, and I could feel her trying to gauge my reaction. "It's important." I wanted to say no, to tell her that I didn't need to meet, that there was nothing left to say. But the words wouldn't come. She was my daughter, and no matter how much she had hurt me, I couldn't turn her away. So I agreed to meet her the following day, in a small cafe in the neighborhood where we used to live. It was a neutral place, a place neither of us had any strong ties to anymore. But somehow it felt like a good starting point for whatever conversation lay ahead. The next day, I arrived early, my hands shaking slightly as I waited for her. I hadn't seen her in person since the wedding, and the thought of looking at her again, of seeing the face I had once held close, the face I had kissed good night 1,000 times, sent a rush of emotions through me. When she walked in, her face was set in a look of determination, but I could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. She had changed. The spark that had once been there was dimmer, and it seemed as if the life she had carefully built around herself had started to unravel. She sat down across from me, her posture stiff, her eyes avoiding mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with everything that had gone unsaid, with the weight of the months that had passed in silence. Finally, she looked up, and for the first time since our last conversation, I saw something that resembled regret in her eyes. She didn't say anything at first, but her gaze softened, just a little. "I don't know where to start," she said, her voice quiet. She shifted in her seat, uncomfortable. "I don't know how we got here, Mom. I don't know how I let it get this far." I nodded slowly, my heart aching at the sound of her voice. She was still my daughter, despite everything. And in that moment, I saw her, really saw her, for the first time in a long time. She wasn't the girl I had raised, not the girl I remembered, but she was still mine, and that reality hit me harder than I expected. "You didn't just let it get this far, honey," I said softly. "You made a choice. You chose a different life, one that didn't have room for me. And that's fine. You have every right to do that. But you can't come back and pretend like nothing happened. You can't just erase me, and then expect me to be here when you need me." Her eyes welled up with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. But she didn't. She swallowed hard, fighting the tears back, and shook her head slowly. "I didn't mean to erase you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought if I could just start over, if I could make my own way, then I could leave all the pain behind. All the things that made me feel less than. I didn't want to be that girl anymore, the one who came from nothing. I didn't want to be tied to a past that didn't fit the future I was trying to build. It hit me then, the depth of her shame. The shame she had carried with her for all these years, the burden of feeling like she wasn't enough, like where she came from was something to be ashamed of. And I realized, in that moment, that I had failed her in ways I never fully understood. I had never been the kind of mother who could protect her from the weight of the world's judgment. I had never shielded her from the harsh reality of being poor, of being different. And in trying to give her everything I could, I had inadvertently taught her to feel ashamed of where she came from. I never asked you to be ashamed of me, I said quietly. I was proud of you, proud of everything you became, despite the odds. But you didn't have to leave me behind to make a better life. You could have brought me with you. I would have supported you, no matter what. She looked down at her hands, and for a long time, she didn't say anything. I could feel the weight of the words we had both left unsaid, the words we had both kept locked inside. She had built this wall between us, and now that she wanted to tear it down, she didn't know how. And I didn't know either. I didn't know how to forgive her, or how to even begin to trust that this was more than just an apology, because she needed something from me. I know I can't fix everything, she said after a while, her voice trembling. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to try, Mom. I want to try to make things right. I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I never stopped thinking about you. But I was so caught up in trying to be someone else that I forgot who I really was. She reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it on mine. I'm sorry, she whispered, the words sounding hollow. But still, I saw the sincerity in her eyes. I'm sorry for everything. I sat there for a long moment, staring at her hand on mine. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that this was the start of something new. But the truth was, I wasn't sure if we could ever go back. Some things had already been broken beyond repair, and I wasn't sure if we could ever piece them together again. But as I looked at her, really looked at her, I saw that she was still my daughter. And no matter how much she had hurt me, no matter how much she had tried to bury me in her story, part of me still wanted to believe that we could find a way back to each other. Maybe not the same way we had been before, but something new, something real. I don't know if we can fix this, I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. But I'm willing to try. For you. For us. She smiled, a small, tentative smile, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I thought that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for us yet. After that meeting, the silence between us didn't completely disappear, but it had shifted. It was as if the words we shared in that small cafe had cracked open a door that had been sealed tight for years. We weren't exactly moving forward, but we weren't stuck in the same place anymore. For the first time, I could see that my daughter, the woman sitting across from me, wasn't the cold stranger I had feared she'd become. She was still the girl I had raised, the one I had fought for, even if she didn't fully recognize it yet. But while I was willing to move slowly towards something resembling healing, I knew that her life had changed in ways I couldn't undo. She had married into wealth and privilege, and those worlds had their own rules, their own expectations. It wasn't just about her or me anymore. It was about Jason's family, their legacy, their history. I understood that the more she tried to reconcile those two worlds, the more impossible it seemed to be. She couldn't please both her roots and the life she was trying to build, and she had tried, as hard as she could, to bury the past in the process. When I returned home after our meeting, I sat quietly for hours, thinking about what had just transpired. My daughter had shown up with the hope of rebuilding our relationship, but I knew deep down that this wasn't just about us anymore. It wasn't only about her regrets and apologies, it was about trust. Jason's family didn't trust her anymore, and that wasn't something that could be mended overnight. They had all but cut her off, and it seemed like no matter how hard she tried, the walls they had built between them wouldn't come down. It wasn't long before I got a call from one of Jason's relatives, a woman named Grace, who had always been polite, if distant, when I'd interacted with her at family gatherings. She had always seemed to be the calm, composed type, the kind of person who kept things under control and never showed any cracks in her perfectly polished exterior. But this time, when she called, her voice was different. It wasn't harsh or angry, but there was something cold about it, something formal that made my stomach drop. "We need to talk," she said, her tone clipped. "About your daughter." My chest tightened. I had known this call was coming, but I wasn't ready for it. The feeling of being on the receiving end of their judgment had become all too familiar over the past few weeks. It wasn't that I was afraid of them, but I was afraid of what it would mean for my daughter. She had been trying so hard to fit in, to live up to their expectations, but in doing so, she had left behind the truth of who she was. And now, it was all unraveling. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I wasn't sure if this was a confrontation or an intervention, but I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. "I think we both know what this is about," Grace replied, her voice stiff. "Your daughter's actions have caused a lot of problems. Jason's family is upset, and frankly, so are we. We can't just pretend that everything is fine. It's going to take more than a few words from her to fix this." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. This was it. The moment I had feared, where I would be caught in the middle, trying to balance my love for my daughter with the harsh reality of the world she had married into. I knew they were angry. Of course they were. They felt betrayed. The lies had been exposed, and now they wanted answers. They wanted everything to go back to the way it was, before the truth came to light. "I understand that they're upset," I said slowly, trying to keep my emotions in check. "But you have to understand that my daughter didn't want any of this. She didn't mean for things to go this way." Grace let out a sigh, and I could hear the weight of frustration in it. Of course she didn't mean for things to go wrong. But that doesn't change the fact that they have. We're not just talking about a small lie here. We're talking about her erasing her entire past, trying to fit into a world that doesn't know her, and in the process, betraying the people who have supported her. My stomach turned. There was a sharpness to her words that made my chest tighten, a sense of finality that left no room for compromise. They were done with her. They had already pulled back their support, and no amount of apologies could change that. I had seen this happen before, in other families, in other relationships, where a small lie became something bigger, something irreparable. "You don't understand," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. "She did it because she felt she had no other choice. She felt she couldn't be who she was and also be part of your world. I don't know if I agree with everything she did, but I understand why she did it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Grace breathing, probably trying to calm herself down. Finally, she spoke again, this time quieter. "Maybe, but understanding why she did it doesn't change what happened. We can't just let her back in like nothing's wrong. This will take time, and it will take more than just an apology." I knew what she was saying, and I hated it. They had already made their decision. They had already closed ranks around their family, and no amount of explaining would undo what had been done. They had their own reputation to protect, their own image to maintain, and my daughter's mistakes had made her a liability. "I'll tell her," I said softly, my throat tight. "I'll tell her what you've said. But I need you to understand something too. She's my daughter. And no matter what happens, I'm not going to turn my back on her. She may have lied, but she's still the person I raised, and I can't just pretend that she doesn't matter to me anymore." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I wondered if Grace was going to respond. Finally, she did, her voice colder than before. "You'll have to choose, then. You can stand by her, or you can stand by the family. But you can't have both." The line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling the weight of her words settle in. I knew what this meant. It meant that my daughter was alone now, cut off from the people she had married into, and it meant that I would be forced to choose. But how could I choose? How could I choose between the child I had loved for so long and the family that had taken her in, for better or worse? I didn't know what I would say to my daughter when I saw her next. I didn't know how I would explain this to her, how I would tell her that the consequences of her actions had gone far beyond what either of us had imagined. But I did know one thing for certain. This was just the beginning of a much longer journey, one that would require patience, forgiveness, and, most of all, trust. The days after that conversation with Grace felt heavier than anything I had experienced in a long time. I had always known that my daughter's marriage to Jason, to his family, would come with its challenges. What I hadn't expected, though, was the magnitude of the price she would pay for her decisions. For years, I had quietly watched her try to blend into their world, trying to shape herself into the person they wanted her to be. But in the end, it had torn her apart, and it was only now, with everything laid bare, that she truly understood the cost. The call from Grace had been the first warning, but it wasn't the last. Over the next few weeks, I became more of an outsider in my own daughter's life. Jason's family kept their distance, cold and formal, their support all but pulled away. My daughter, in a futile attempt to patch things up, started seeking my advice, asking me how to fix the damage she had done. But how could I offer her advice when I wasn't even sure what I believed anymore? It wasn't just about repairing her marriage. It was about rebuilding her relationship with herself. And that, I couldn't help her with. Not yet, anyway. I spent those days in quiet contemplation, trying to figure out where I stood in all of this. I had always been her mother, but now, it felt like I was her last resort, someone she could turn to only when everything else had fallen apart. She needed me, but she didn't know how to need me. She didn't know how to ask for the things she had pushed away for so long. And I, as her mother, was left standing at the periphery, watching her struggle with the pieces of a life that didn't quite fit together anymore. One evening, after a particularly tense conversation with Jason's family about my daughter's future, I went for a walk to clear my head. The cool autumn air wrapped around me, the leaves crunching underfoot, and for a moment, it felt like the world was still, just for me. But it didn't last long. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I knew immediately who it was. I had been waiting for her to reach out again, but I wasn't sure I was ready for the conversation that was about to happen. I stepped into the dim light of a street lamp before answering. "Mom, I need to talk." Her voice cracked, and I could tell immediately that she was on the verge of breaking down. I could hear the desperation, the rawness in her words. She wasn't the composed woman I had seen at the cafe anymore. She was vulnerable, unsure, and that made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to salvage what had been broken between us. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "Let me come to you." "No," she replied quickly. "It's not about that. It's about me, Mom. About what I've done, and what it's cost me." I swallowed hard, forcing down the lump in my throat. "I know, but you can't carry this on your own. I'm here, okay? You've always had me, no matter what." "I know," she whispered, "but I don't think I've ever really had myself. I've spent so much time pretending, trying to be who they wanted me to be, trying to fit in with their world, that I lost sight of who I really was. And now everything's falling apart, and I don't know what to do." Her words cut through me, but I stayed quiet for a moment, letting her continue, letting her voice the turmoil she had been holding in for so long. I could feel the weight of her guilt, the deep sense of regret that had overtaken her. She wasn't just worried about Jason's family. She was worried about the woman she had become and the woman she thought she had to be in order to be loved. "I'm scared, Mom," she admitted. "I don't know if I can fix this. I don't know if I can ever be the person they want me to be, the person I wanted to be. I feel like everything I've worked for is slipping through my fingers." The rawness in her voice made my heart ache. I had never wanted her to feel this way. I had never wanted her to feel like she wasn't enough, like she had to erase her past to build a better future. But somewhere along the way, she had convinced herself that she wasn't worthy of both. She couldn't be herself and be accepted. I couldn't even begin to imagine the weight of the world she had been carrying, the pressure she had felt to live up to impossible standards. "Honey," I said softly, "you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be anyone other than who you are. I've always loved you for who you are, not for who you thought you should be. And no matter what happens with them, no matter what happens with Jason's family, you have to remember that." "I wish I could believe that," she said quietly. "But it feels like it's too late. They've already made up their minds about me. And I can't change that. I can't change how they see me." I took a deep breath. You can't control how they see you, but you can control how you see yourself. You're not defined by them, or by anyone else. You're defined by the choices you make now, the person you choose to be from here on out. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could feel her processing what I had said, the weight of it sinking in. And then, finally, she spoke again, her voice a little steadier than before. "Do you think it's possible to rebuild from this?" she asked. "Do you think I can fix this, fix myself? I didn't have all the answers, and I wasn't sure if I could even answer her question fully. What I knew was that we had both been through so much, and it would take time. Time to heal, time to rebuild trust, time to forgive ourselves. But I knew that we could try, and that was the most important part. I think you can try, I said softly. And that's all any of us can do. The call ended shortly after that, and as I stood there in the quiet darkness, I realized something. I didn't know what the future would hold for my daughter or for me, but I knew that for the first time in a long time, we were both willing to try. Maybe that was the most we could ask for. The silence that had once echoed between us was no longer deafening. There was still work to be done, still distance to be bridged. But for the first time, I believed that we could bridge it together. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to navigate the complex, painful journey of family and forgiveness, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Share your thoughts in the comments below. How do you handle difficult family dynamics? Let's talk about it and support each other. See you soon in the next story.